Tonight, the army takes direct control of Egypt, replacing the 82-year-old soldier it put into power 3 decades ago with a fresh new 75-year-old soldier. So, is this really a moment that delivers power to the people? In Tahrir Square, they certainly think so. The reign of Hosni Mubarak, the man they're optimistically calling the last pharaoh, is over.
This is such an outpouring of emotion, elemental in its intensity, which it makes you realise that it wasn't just the thousands of protesters on the square that wanted Mubarak to go. It was almost an entire nation.
We're joined live from Cairo by 2 Egyptians who've witnessed these remarkable days. But tonight, should we be cautious that the new Egypt represents real change?
It's a military junta, but not as we know it. That seems to be the message from Cairo. In Western capitals, meanwhile, they'll be watching and waiting to see how the generals meet the demands for real democracy.
We're joined by the principal architect of George Bush's plan to democratize the Arab world, as well as by the Muslim Brotherhood. And how did the young leaders of the Cairo protests mobilize the masses? We reveal the role played by Washington and London in equipping them.
People have become very sophisticated about what they hear, what they read, what they see. And so we developed a different way to communicate, and I called it Public Diplomacy 2.0.
Good evening. 18 days that brought an end to 30 years in power. Hosni Mubarak is no longer the president of Egypt. The jubilation of his people has been beamed across the world. Tonight, Egypt enters a new era with a once invincible strongman forced out in a revolt led by its youth, who'd only ever known Mubarak as their leader. But with the army now in charge, is this just another military coup, or will it be the real change the protesters had demanded? Well, we can speak now to Tim Hewell, who's in Cairo. Tim, is this over for the protesters? Have they got everything that they wanted?
Well, first of all, I must say it's just amazing scenes. You can probably hear behind me in Cairo tonight. It feels like almost everyone's out on the streets. You can hear the blare of car horns, people dancing, letting off firecrackers, V for victory signs, and certainly I think a very large number of the protesters will now think that they've achieved everything that they want, because the single demand running all the way through this was for the departure of Mr. Mubarak, and now he's gone. And already indeed on one of the main Facebook sites associated with the protest, they're saying, let's go back to Tahrir Square, let's clear up all the rubbish we left, and let's go home. But even so, already some disagreement among protesters, because people are simply saying, we've got no idea what's coming next. We know the army's taken over, but what will the timetable that the army plans for elections be? What will be the role of the Vice President, Omar Suleiman? How thoroughgoing will any attempts to dismantle Mr. Mubarak's system be? How will they involve opposition parties? People don't know the answers to any of those questions, and I think until people do, we can't exclude the possibility of further protests. But certainly for tonight, that's very far from most people's minds. All people in Cairo really want to do tonight, most people, is to enjoy themselves and celebrate. It's a party like the Egyptian capital has never witnessed before. Almost the whole population, it seems, out celebrating in the streets. 18 days of unprecedented protests have brought down the head of a regime these people hated for its corruption, its brutality, and its failure to realise their country's potential. Now they can hardly believe what they've achieved.
This is such an outpouring of emotion, elemental in its intensity, which it makes you realise that it wasn't just the thousands of protesters on the square that wanted Mubarak to go. It was almost an entire nation.
Everyone is in the street. They are cheering that Mubarak's left. Thank God that he did. You can see everyone is in the street. Thank God that he left.
We are very happy. We have nothing except happiness. We wish nothing else. We wish Mubarak go out, and we will order ourselves.
It's been an extraordinary end to a day that began, like many others, in stalemate. Protesters had heard President Mubarak say for a third time that he wouldn't go. they'd have to be satisfied, they were told, with a promise that the army would oversee a process of democratisation.
تلتزم القوات المسلحة.
The armed forces make a commitment to caring for the people's legitimate demands and to seeking to follow their implementation within the timeframes until the complete transfer of power and the achievement of the democratic free society which people aspire to.
But the crowds swelling on the streets made clear it wasn't enough.
They are thieves. They took our money.
Kill our children.
Outside country. 30 years we live poor. All of Egyptian poor now.
We don't believe the system. We don't believe the TV, the Egyptian TV. We don't believe they are trying to make something bad between us and the army.
Caught between president and people, this government minister argued that it would be good for reform if Mubarak stayed a bit longer.
He wants to guarantee that things move smoothly according to the constitution, precisely to avoid the coup d'etat scenario you are pointing at.
But protesters outside the presidential palace realised that time was running out fast for Mubarak when they heard that the general secretary of the ruling party had suddenly resigned.
But Rawi did all his effort to save the NDP, but he couldn't. This proves that Mubarak is losing legitimacy within the NDP.
Soon afterwards, the army's patience snapped. On television, Vice President Omar Suleiman with this announcement that Mubarak was out and the military were in charge.
President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as a President of the Republic and has entrusted the High Council of the Armed Forces to carry out the dealing of the country.
Oh! Congratulations for all my people! Congratulations! Yes!
A minute later, this is how our guide, like millions of other Egyptians, got the news.
Vive l'Égypte! Vive l'Égypte! Vive l'Égypte!
Immediately afterwards, the streets began to drown in a cacophony of jubilant noise. I've watched this revolution unfold through all the elation and fear of the last 2.5 weeks, seen idealism and courage which at times seemed in danger of being overwhelmed by chaos and violence. And now, dizzyingly fast, they've got what they wanted. Mubarak is out. But this is still only the start of the road towards Egyptian democracy, and that process will be guided by the military, because what we've seen tonight, in the name of the people, in the name of freedom, is nevertheless a kind of military coup. Can the army, which has backed authoritarianism for so long, give way to a new breed of civilian politicians?
If you would ask me what role would you prefer for that military entity to play, I would say the less the better, because we don't want a military regime. A military government has been imposed by the necessity of the situation.
That, though, is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they're just cheering the soldiers and revelling in the fresh air of freedom.
Tim Hewell reporting, and you can follow him on Twitter for updates on events in Egypt. Now, the Islamist party, the Muslim Brotherhood, has taken a low-key role in these protests, but may stand to gain from them more than any other faction. Before we came on air, I spoke to a senior Brotherhood leader, Helmi Al-Ghazar, and I asked him if he trusted the army to treat this as a real transition and to make moves towards democracy.
Yes, I'm sure that the Egyptian army will take his transient period, and he will fulfill his promise to the country and to the people that democracy and transparent election will be there in Egypt after a few months.
But General Tantawi, the army chief, is a member of the old guard. He's been the defense minister for the last 20 years.
Yes, Mr. Tantawi was defense minister for about 20 years. It's okay, but he promised to fulfill the demands of the Egyptian revolution, and we trust very much in our army because it's the organization, the only respectable organization in Egypt. So we trust very much in what the army promised.
So let me ask you then about some of the concerns that are felt in Washington, elsewhere in the West and in Israel about the Muslim Brotherhood. Do you believe that Egypt should be an Islamic state?
Egypt, first of all, is an Islamic country. Not from now, but from 14th century. The West is afraid because many rumors, and this is absolutely incorrect, because there is no Islamic country having Islamists in their government and make anything harmful to the West. And for Muslim Brotherhood, this is the first time that the Muslim Brotherhood share in a revolution, and will share only in the popular or in the People Council, and they will never, for many years, introduce any candidate for presidency seat, because now we are in a very risky situation. Egypt needs to share every political party, every political group, and we just will share and will not dominate the state or the government in Egypt.
All right, but do you support the peace treaty that is in place between Egypt and Israel?
Yes, the peace process and the peace agreement, this thing will be discussed in the parliament, not in the channels, the TV channels. When the election take part or will occur in a transparent election will occur in Egypt, a people council will discuss this clearly, and which is valuable to Egypt, which is valuable to all countries in the area, will be accepted from the new parliament.
That's Helmi Ghazal from the Muslim Brotherhood. We hope to be live in Cairo in a moment. But in the meantime, international reaction to events in Egypt has been swift. Not so much from Arab governments, but from the West. I'm joined now from Washington by the former US Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. Paul Wolfowitz, what were your feelings as you saw the scenes from Egypt today?
Well, I don't see how one could have any feeling other than enormous joy at the joy of the Egyptian people for what they've accomplished, and that they've accomplished it peacefully and with a remarkable spirit of fellowship among men and women, young and old, civilians and military. It's a huge achievement, and there's many uncertainties going forward, and obviously things could go wrong, although I think this is a very good start. But we ought to begin by just celebrating what they've done, and I think they have vindicated the view that Arabs aren't different from other people. I believe President Obama earlier today quoted Martin Luther King saying there's something in the soul that cries for freedom. And I think that is universal. Big differences among people in different places, but it's a wonderful thing.
The trouble with what you're saying, though, you're calling it a huge achievement, but many Egyptians, many people elsewhere in the world will be thinking, well, America didn't really do very much to help them achieve this. Essentially, President Mubarak has been kept in power for decades with the help of the United States.
Well, I wish we'd done more. I've been arguing for a long time, in fact, that it's a mistake, as in fact President Bush said, it's a mistake to trade freedom for stability. You end up with neither. And I think if we had been more in the forefront here, we might have more influence. But look, it's a triumph for the democratic way of thinking, which is British, it's American, it's now all over the world. It's not in Iran, unfortunately. If I were the Iranians, I'd be a bit worried about what this means.
All right, but did you argue for this kind of change in Egypt? I mean, you've served successive US administrations. Was there talk about what should be done in Egypt behind the scenes? We know, of course, what was said publicly about countries like Iraq.
More than behind the scenes, listen, it's very much on the record that Secretary Rice went to Cairo and specifically said more or less what I just said, that for too many years the United States has sacrificed freedom for stability, ended up with neither. And for a while, the Bush administration actually leaned pretty hard on Mubarak to release political prisoners, to allow greater openness in the political space. I think, for reasons I don't quite understand, in the last few years, retreated some. And I think this administration, unfortunately, said, well, that's Bush, we're not going to do that at all. But it's a wake